Imagine this. You wake up in the middle of the night, your heart racing, drenched in sweat, convinced that something is chasing you. But when you open your eyes, there's nothing there, just silence and darkness. Why does the human mind create such terrifying illusions, even when we are safe in bed? For thousands of years, nightmares have haunted our sleep. Ancient civilizations saw them as messages from the gods or warnings from the underworld. In medieval Europe, people believed that a demonic figure called the night hag sat on their chest, stealing their breath during sleep. Today, psychology tells us that nightmares are not just random images, but windows into our unconscious mind, symbols of fears, desires, and unresolved conflicts that we may not even recognize in our waking life. This raises a question that touches everyone, no matter where they come from. Are nightmares simply accidents of the brain, or are they trying to tell us something essential about who we are? In this video, we are going to explore the hidden world of nightmares, why they happen, what they might mean, and how some of the greatest thinkers in psychology, like Sigmund Freud, Carl Jung, and James Hillman, have tried to interpret them. Along the way, we'll uncover strange stories, cultural beliefs, and scientific findings that reveal how nightmares shape not only our sleep, but our very sense of self. Nightmares as a universal experience. Let's start with a powerful truth. Nightmares are one of the few experiences that every human being shares. Children have them, adults have them, even soldiers hardened by war have them. From Tokyo to New York, from ancient Rome to today's digital age, nightmares follow us like shadows we can't escape. In fact, nightmares are so common that they have shaped entire cultures. The word nightmare itself comes from Old English, night combined with mare, meaning a malicious spirit believed to suffocate sleepers. In Scandinavian folklore, the Mara was a ghostly figure who sat on your chest, causing terror. In some Asian traditions, bad dreams were thought to be warnings from ancestors or spirits, urging you to correct your path. Even modern pop culture reflects this timeless fear. Think about how many horror films, novels, and games draw on the logic of nightmares, blurring reality and illusion, trapping us in a world where our deepest fears come alive. But here's the real mystery. Nightmares are not just entertainment. They are deeply personal. What terrifies one person might not disturb another. For a child, it might be a monster under the bed. For an adult, it might be being chased, falling, or losing someone they love. Each nightmare feels tailored to our own private anxieties. And this is why psychologists became fascinated. Perhaps nightmares are not just random noise, but meaningful messages from within. The bridge to psychology. Sigmund Freud, the father of psychoanalysis, was one of the first to systematically study dreams. He believed that every dream, whether pleasant or terrifying, was a disguised expression of repressed desires. In his view, nightmares revealed conflicts that our conscious mind refused to face. Carl Jung, Freud's student who later broke away, offered another perspective. Nightmares were not simply personal, but archetypal. They tapped into symbols from the collective unconscious, a deep reservoir of human experience shared across cultures. And then there's James Hillman, the archetypal psychologist, who warned against treating nightmares as problems to be solved. For Hillman, nightmares were not intruders, but essential guides, figures that forced us to confront the raw, unsettling truths of existence. What unites all these views is a striking idea. Nightmares are not meaningless. They may disturb us, but they also reveal something crucial about how the human mind tries to survive, adapt, and grow. A historical anecdote. Consider this story from ancient Rome. The historian Suetonius tells us that Emperor Caligula, infamous for his cruelty, was terrified by nightmares. Despite being one of the most powerful men in the world, he would wander his palace at night, begging servants to stay awake with him so he wouldn't have to sleep alone. His power could command armies, but it couldn't protect him from his own mind. This example reminds us that nightmares level all distinctions. Rich or poor, king or beggar, we are all vulnerable when the lights go out. Why this matters to us today? You might wonder, why should we care about nightmares in the 21st century when science can measure brain waves and explain REM sleep? The answer is simple. Nightmares continue to influence our lives in ways we rarely admit. Studies show that frequent nightmares are linked to higher stress, anxiety, and even trauma. Soldiers returning from combat often report vivid, recurring nightmares as part of post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. Children who suffer from bullying sometimes experience nightly terrors that mirror their daytime fears. Even everyday stress, like financial struggles or relationship conflict, can echo in our dreams as frightening scenarios. In short, nightmares are not just random. They are mirrors of our psychological and emotional state. And by studying them, we can learn more about how the human mind processes fear, pain, and resilience. Setting the stage. So, in this video, we will journey deeper into the labyrinth of nightmares. We'll examine how Freud, Jung, and Hillman interpreted them. We'll use stories and metaphors to make sense of their strange, often symbolic language. And finally, we'll connect these insights to modern life. Because nightmares are not just relics of the past, but active forces shaping who we are today. If you've ever woken up shaking from a nightmare, wondering what it meant, then this exploration is for you. Stay with me, because what you're about to discover might just change the way you look at the darkest corners of your own mind. The language of the unconscious. When Carl Jung described dreams as the royal road to the unconscious, he was not speaking poetically. He meant that dreams are coded messages, symbols, images, and sensations that bypass our rational filters. To Jung, nightmares were not meaningless disturbances of sleep, but rather urgent signals. They are like a fire alarm at 3 in the morning, unpleasant, disruptive, but impossible to ignore. Why would our unconscious mind trouble us this way? From an evolutionary standpoint, psychologists like Patrick McNamara have suggested that nightmares serve a protective role. They rehearse threatening scenarios so that our nervous system is better prepared for danger. Imagine our ancient ancestors sleeping in a cave. A nightmare of being chased by predators might not simply be a random firing of neurons. It could be the brain's way of training the body to react faster when real danger comes. In that sense, the nightmare is both a curse and a survival tool. Yet, beyond survival, nightmares also carry symbolic meaning. Jung observed that figures in nightmares often personify what he called the shadow, the hidden parts of our psyche we refuse to acknowledge. These shadow figures may appear as monsters, strangers, or even distorted versions of ourselves. They are frightening precisely because they show us truths we resist. Consider this. Have you ever dreamed of being pursued by someone unknown, only to realize that their face is eerily similar to your own? Jung would interpret this as the shadow self demanding recognition. Nightmares force us to face what we deny in waking life. Freud's perspective, fear as disguise. While Jung emphasized symbols and archetypes, Sigmund Freud had a different lens. Freud argued that nightmares, like all dreams, disguise hidden wishes. Even fear could be a mask. For example, a dream of being punished might conceal a forbidden desire. In Freud's view, the unconscious mind speaks in riddles. Nightmares do not only frighten us, they reveal our conflicts between desire and morality. Freud's most controversial suggestion was that nightmares sometimes protect sleep. Instead of waking us, the dream disguises unbearable thoughts in the form of horror, so the mind can continue resting. For instance, a child dreaming of a monster might actually be struggling with fear of a strict parent. The monster is less dangerous than confronting the real source of fear. Modern neuroscience has partly challenged Freud, but also supported aspects of his theory. Studies in REM sleep show that our brains replay emotional conflicts during the night. Nightmares, then, may be the mind's attempt to digest unresolved stress. Freud's contribution remains vital. Nightmares are never random. They are messages wrapped in fear. Nightmares across cultures. Nightmares are not just psychological phenomena, they are cultural ones too. Across societies, terrifying dreams have been interpreted as encounters with spirits, demons, or ancestors. In medieval Europe, people believed that nightmares were caused by a demon called the mare, who sat on the chest of the sleeper, suffocating them. This belief even gave us the word nightmare. In Japan, there is the legend of the kanashibari, the sensation of being held down by an invisible force during sleep paralysis. In West African traditions, nightmares were sometimes seen as messages from the spirit world, warnings or guidance delivered through terror. What unites these cultural interpretations is the belief that nightmares carry meaning. Whether they are signs from gods, ancestors, or the unconscious mind, Humans across history have treated nightmares as significant. They disrupt the ordinary order of sleep and demand explanation. This cultural dimension also highlights how our interpretation shapes our experience. Someone who believes nightmares are demonic attacks may feel even more terror, while someone trained in psychology may see them as opportunities for self-knowledge. In both cases, the nightmare commands attention. The shadow in daily life. Let us return to Jung's concept of the shadow, for it remains one of the most powerful explanations of nightmares. The shadow contains everything we reject about ourselves: anger, envy, desire, weakness. Because we suppress these qualities, they return in dreams, magnified and grotesque. For example, a person who prides themselves on being gentle might dream of committing violence. A highly disciplined worker may dream of chaos and failure. These dreams feel threatening because they contradict our conscious identity. But Jung would insist that integrating the shadow is necessary for wholeness. The nightmare is an invitation to balance. Consider the story of a corporate lawyer who repeatedly dreamed of being chased by wolves. In therapy, he realized the wolves represented his own suppressed aggression, the drive to break free from his rigid professional role. By confronting this shadow, he eventually left his job to pursue a more creative path. The nightmare was not merely torture. It was a message leading to transformation. This idea aligns with many spiritual traditions. In Buddhism, for instance, demons are often interpreted as illusions of the mind, projections of our inner fears. By recognizing them, one gains liberation. The nightmare, then, is not an enemy but a teacher in disguise. Nightmares as emotional regulation. Modern research adds another layer. Nightmares are closely linked with emotional regulation. When we dream, especially in REM sleep, the amygdala, the brain's center of fear, becomes highly active. Researchers such as Rosalind Cartwright have shown that people experiencing divorce or trauma often have more intense nightmares. These dreams allow the mind to process overwhelming emotions, almost like therapy performed by the brain itself. A study published in Sleep Medicine found that people who could recall their nightmares were better able to cope with stress the next day. It is as if the nightmare provides a rehearsal space for the psyche. You suffer in the dream so that you can endure in reality. Still, there is a paradox. While nightmares help us regulate emotions, too many nightmares, especially chronic ones, may worsen anxiety. This delicate balance shows that nightmares are not merely byproducts of stress. They are active participants in shaping how we handle stress. The metaphor of fire. To understand nightmares, imagine a fire in a forest. At first, the fire feels destructive. It consumes trees, frightens animals, and leaves behind ash. But in the long term, the fire clears deadwood, fertilizes the soil, and creates space for new growth. Nightmares are like that fire. They burn through the clutter of our unconscious, often painfully, yet they prepare the ground for transformation. Many people report that after facing recurring nightmares, they experience breakthroughs in their personal life. Survivors of trauma, once they learn to reinterpret their nightmares, often describe them as steps toward healing. The nightmare becomes a rite of passage, a crossing into deeper self-awareness. Archetypes and the shadow within. Carl Jung believed that each of us carries not just a conscious self, the face we show the world, but also a hidden dimension, what he called the shadow. This shadow isn't necessarily evil, but it holds the traits we repress: anger, jealousy, desire, ambition, even talents we were told not to express. The shadow whispers when you feel envy at a colleague's success, or when you suddenly lash out in traffic and wonder, where did that come from? Jung argued that confronting the shadow is a necessary step toward individuation, the process of becoming whole. But here's the paradox. Most people spend their lives avoiding their own darkness. We distract ourselves with work, entertainment, and even spirituality to keep from facing what lies within. History is full of examples of leaders undone by the shadow. Consider Richard Nixon, a man driven by ambition, yet consumed by paranoia. His downfall in the Watergate scandal was not simply political miscalculation, but the eruption of his repressed fears and suspicions. In a way, Nixon's shadow destroyed him before his enemies ever could. And yet, ignoring the shadow doesn't make it disappear, it only makes it stronger. Like a neglected child, it grows resentful, waiting for the moment to sabotage your carefully built life. Freud and the battle of desire. While Jung focused on archetypes and the collective unconscious, Sigmund Freud turned inward, dissecting the forces of desire and repression. He proposed the tension between the id, our primal instincts, the ego, our conscious self, and the superego, the moral voice of society. Think about the simple act of craving. You want a slice of cake at midnight. The id shouts, "Eat it now." The superego scolds, "You'll ruin your health." The ego struggles to mediate. On the surface, it seems trivial, but multiply this conflict across relationships, careers, and ambitions, and you begin to see why humans live in constant tension. Freud famously warned that civilization itself is built on repression, that society demands we restrain our instincts for order to exist. Without repression, there would be chaos. But the cost, he argued, is widespread neurosis. In other words, the very rules that hold us together also make us sick. Modern psychology has softened Freud's harsher claims, yet his insight remains painfully relevant. Scroll through social media and you'll see polished images of perfect lives, while behind the screen millions struggle with anxiety, depression, and loneliness. Civilization is still demanding masks, and people still crack under their weight. Hillman and the value of suffering. Enter James Hillman, a post-Jungian thinker who offered a radical perspective. Perhaps suffering isn't a problem to be solved, but a teacher to be listened to. Hillman argued that our culture treats pain like an illness to be eradicated. We medicate, distract, or suppress it. But in doing so, we silence the voice of the soul. Hillman once wrote that we must learn to value the symptom, not destroy it. Imagine your anxiety as a messenger knocking on your door, trying to tell you something important. Most of us slam the door shut. But what if, instead, we invited it in? History and myth echo this idea. In Greek tragedy, suffering often brings wisdom. Oedipus blinds himself, but in blindness he finally sees the truth. In Christianity, the cross, an instrument of torture, becomes a symbol of redemption. Even in Buddhism, suffering, dukkha, is the first noble truth, the entry point to awakening. Hillman pushes us to stop asking, "How do I eliminate suffering?" and start asking, "What does my suffering want from me?" This shift reframes pain from an obstacle to a path, a radical idea in a culture obsessed with comfort. The mirror of everyday life. Let's bring these abstract ideas down to earth. Think of the last time you felt betrayed. Maybe a friend let you down, or a partner broke your trust. Instinctively, you might blame them. But if we apply Jung, Freud, and Hillman together, a richer story emerges. Jung would ask, what part of your shadow did this betrayal awaken? Maybe it revealed your fear of abandonment, or your hidden need for control. Freud would note the conflict between your desire for closeness, the id, your need for self-respect, the ego, and the societal pressure to move on, the superego. Hillman would say, don't rush to erase the pain. Sit with it. Listen, what does it want you to learn? Perhaps the betrayal is forcing you to recognize boundaries you've long ignored. This isn't just philosophy, it's psychology lived in real time. And when you begin to see life this way, every frustration, every loss, every desire becomes more than an accident. It becomes a message. Why this matters today? We live in a world that constantly tells us to optimize our bodies, our careers, even our happiness. Self-help books and motivational talks promise endless growth, endless positivity. But the thinkers we've explored, Jung, Freud, Hillman, whisper a countercultural truth. Growth often comes from facing the uncomfortable, not escaping it. Jung reminds us to meet our shadow, not deny it. Freud reminds us that repression fuels inner conflict. Hillman reminds us to listen to our wounds as guides. Together, they suggest a deeper way of living, not by eliminating struggle, but by making meaning out of it. And here's where psychology blends with history. Great civilizations have always recognized the transformative power of struggle. The Renaissance was born from plague and war. Jazz emerged from oppression and sorrow, yet became the soundtrack of resilience. In your own life, what feels unbearable today may be the soil from which your most profound transformation grows. As we step back and look at the threads we've pulled together, from Jung's archetypes to Freud's unconscious drives to Hillman's soul-centered vision, one thing becomes clear. Psychology is not just a set of abstract theories. It is, at its core, a lens through which we understand the struggles, desires, and fears that shape the human condition. What began as separate schools of thought, sometimes even at odds with one another, can actually be seen as pieces of a much larger mosaic. Each perspective illuminates a different corner of the psyche, and when we combine them, we get a richer, more complex picture of who we are. But perhaps the most important takeaway is not just academic. These ideas continue to ripple through our daily lives. The archetypes Jung described still show up in the movies we watch and the myths we retell. Freud's notions of repression echo in modern conversations about mental health, trauma, and the weight of unspoken memories. Hillman's insistence on the poetic dimension of the soul reminds us that healing isn't only about fixing what's broken, but about giving meaning to our suffering. This journey through psychology is, ultimately, a mirror. By understanding these thinkers, we're invited to see our own patterns, our own hidden motivations, and perhaps even our own path toward transformation. And that is where our story now turns, toward the final reflection and the lesson we can carry forward. After walking through the layered perspectives of Jung, Freud, and Hillman, we arrive at a natural question. So what does all this mean for us today? Why should we, in an age dominated by neuroscience and cognitive science, still pay attention to these older psychological visions? The answer lies in their continuing relevance to the human story. While modern psychology often emphasizes brain scans, data, and measurable behavior, Jung, Freud, and Hillman remind us that the psyche cannot be reduced to numbers alone. They remind us that the human soul, whether we call it the unconscious, the archetypal imagination, or the poetic life, still demands to be seen, honored, and understood. One of the enduring insights we can take away is that suffering is not simply a problem to be eliminated. Freud showed us how unprocessed pain can become buried, only to return in disguised forms of anxiety, obsession, or compulsion. Jung suggested that even the darkest experiences can hold archetypal meaning, guiding us toward a more complete self. And Hillman urged us not to escape suffering, but to deepen into it, seeing it as a voice of the soul. This shift, from avoiding pain to engaging with it, can transform the way we live our everyday lives. Take, for example, the way we think about anxiety. In the modern world, anxiety is often seen purely as a disorder to be medicated away. But through the lens of depth psychology, anxiety may also be a signal, a restless stirring of the unconscious that something in our life is out of balance, or that a hidden part of us is demanding recognition. Instead of silencing it, we might learn to listen. Another lesson is the recognition of inner multiplicity. We are not singular, flat beings with one stable identity. Jung's archetypes remind us that within each of us lives a cast of characters: the hero, the shadow, the wise elder, the trickster. Hillman took this further, suggesting that the psyche is inherently polytheistic, alive with multiple voices and perspectives. To live well is not to silence all but one, but to hold space for these many figures, allowing them to dialogue with each other. This vision offers a more compassionate way of seeing ourselves, not as fractured or broken, but as richly complex. There is also the role of imagination. In a culture obsessed with productivity and measurable outcomes, imagination often gets relegated to the realm of children or art. Yet Jung and Hillman both insisted that imagination is central to psychological health. The images, myths, and dreams that rise within us are not trivial. They are the language of the psyche. Engaging with them, whether through art, journaling, or dream work, can help us uncover truths about ourselves that logic alone cannot reach. Ultimately, these psychological visions converge on one essential point: the soul longs for meaning. Whether through myth, symbol, dream, or analysis, we are always searching for a story large enough to contain our experiences. When life feels fragmented or overwhelming, it is often because we have lost that deeper sense of meaning. Depth psychology invites us to recover it, not by offering quick solutions, but by teaching us to stay with the mystery, to listen to the symbols, and to allow transformation to unfold over time. So what can we carry forward? First, that the psyche is not an enemy, but a guide. Second, that suffering, while painful, can be a teacher. And third, that imagination is not an escape from reality, but a doorway into its deeper layers. In the end, the legacy of Jung, Freud, and Hillman is not confined to textbooks. It is alive in the way we confront our shadows, the way we interpret our dreams, the way we find beauty even in sorrow. By engaging with their insights, we are reminded that psychology is not just about the mind. It is about the soul in all its depth, complexity, and mystery. And perhaps that is the greatest takeaway of all, that to be human is to live not only on the surface of things, but also in dialogue with the depths. If we are willing to descend into the unconscious, into our archetypes, into the images that haunt us, we may discover that what we feared as darkness is, in truth, the very source of our light.